Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Bold predictions for this South Carolina program heading into the 2024 season. And Dill, these are some of our favorite episodes to do where we both get the opportunity to call our shots heading into 2024, but a lot of you guys as well. I mean, we learn a ton from you guys in the comment section. You guys routinely put us onto some of those under the radar players. For the South Carolina fans checking it out, would love to hear some bold predictions from you guys as well. And if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, Dill, I want to just give my general take on this South Carolina program. And that is, I think a lot of people across the country look at South Carolina in 2023 and say, this team took a step back under Shane Beamer. And although that might be the case in terms of on paper, on the record, Dill, there were a lot of aspects of this South Carolina team that you liked. I mean, it really just came down to the offensive line struggling in pass protection, struggling getting the run game going. And I think South Carolina fans certainly know this. If you cannot pass protect, you can't run the football in the SEC, it's going to be really hard to win a lot of football games. And I think it blinded a lot of people from a lot of different aspects of this team that were pretty damn good in the 2023 season, fired up to get into our bold predictions. I'm going to start off with a hot take here, top 50 rushing attack for South Carolina in the 2024 season. Now, why might this be so bold? You look at South Carolina in the 2023 season, averaged 2.8 yards per carry. That was 128th in the country. I look at this South Carolina team. We think the offensive line gets substantially better, and we're going to dive into that conversation in just a second. But I look at Lenore Sellers. He goes 6'3", 240. Rocket Sanders, 6 foot, 230 pounds. Those are two of the premier athletes we see in the SEC in 2024, both in the same backfield. I have a feeling this South Carolina team is going to run the football a lot behind an offensive line that we think is much better than it was in 2023. I think this South Carolina rushing attack can do some damage in the SEC in the 2024 season.
I mean, Lenore Sellers obviously will add a ton to this rushing attack, but I still think people are just sleeping on the fact that Raheem Sanders is one of the better running backs in the country.
So good.
When he was at the height of his powers and Arkansas's offense was kind of moving it a little bit, their offensive line was playing solid, he was so dynamic, creating a lot of big plays, doing a good job keeping that Arkansas team on schedule. He's such a good running back. I think, again, people just last year didn't really work out, but nothing at Arkansas was working. Offensive line was really bad. He was obviously dealing with some injuries, and there's just no help around him. I think if he can get back to that form, if South Carolina's offense can be clicking and be operating at a pretty high level, he adds such a new dimension to what they have in terms of his ability to hit big plays and work that run game better. And then obviously pair him up with Lenora Sellers, who just creates a little bit more space for what Raheem wants to do. I'm kind of with you. I think this rushing attack can be really
I look at this South Carolina offense and say it kind of reminds me of when Arkansas was hammering the football in the SEC a couple of years ago with KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders. I mean, those are two just physically imposing ball carriers. And if you're Shane Beamer in South Carolina, you say, I want to make teams tackle these guys 40-plus times a game. And if you can do that and you throw in some other guys in the transfer portal like Oscar Attaway, who was very productive coming from the group of 5 ranks, I think this rushing attack can take a massive step forward. I think one of the most important conversations surrounding an improved rushing attack is that's going to help the offensive line. Now, we think this offensive line just gets better because, one, you had a lot of true freshmen that just weren't quite ready to play in 2023. That became quite obvious. I thought both true freshmen, especially Tree at the left tackle spot, got better as the season went along. If you can run the football better and kind of stay out of those second and third and long situations, those obvious passing situations, and teams aren't just kind of teeing up in the pass rush, that's going to help your offensive line, specifically in pass pro. Look at this offensive line, 2 things I really like. One, the young talents there. You talk about Tree. You talk about Baugh. You talk about Marquis Anderson or potentially even true freshman Josiah Thompson. I think the talent has some serious upside, but I think more importantly, Shane Beamer looked at the offensive line and said, hey, we were too reliant on young offensive linemen who might not have been quite ready. He goes to the transfer portal and just grabs a ton of experienced offensive linemen that are going into their 4th, 5th, I think in some cases, 6 years of college football. That's going to help this offensive line take that step as well, because the depth is something that they lacked last year. They have it in 2024.
And when you talk depth, I think a big thing was, I mean, you had Vershawn Lee having to kick out and play right tackle. He's just not a tackle. At the end of the day, he works better at center. His body's more kind of like built to be a center. And I
He's
think
not a tackle.
if they can just get someone at that right tackle spot to play well, and I think you have a couple of true freshmen. I know Josiah Thompson gets all the kind of attention. I saw Cam Pringle sitting at like some event table, I think signing autographs, and was like, well, I mean, this guy looks the part at least. So he's certainly physically exactly kind of what you look for in a high-level offensive lineman, especially at that tackle spot. So I think, again, you just get natural progression from Tree and Trovon Baugh, who I think both can be very, very good offensive linemen, especially Tree. I think Tree is a really good
And I think both of those, sorry to cut you off, both of those offensive linemen weren't even in for spring practice. Yeah. So they were both late enrollees in the summer. I mean, 8 weeks later since stepping on campus, they were starting games in the SEC. That's not necessarily what you want on the offensive line, but they didn't have that much of depth. They obviously dealt with some injuries in that spring, so they kind of were forced to play guys that might not have been quite ready. You feel better about these guys being a lot more ready in 2024, and to kind of highlight
continuity, you have that continuity that you're kind of looking for. You're going to have three guys coming back with Tree, Baugh, and obviously
Lee,
center spot, who have all played a ton. So again, I think that's something. Again, when Shane Beamer first takes over, he had to gut that thing. He had to turn that whole roster over, and now I think you're starting to see it be his program a little bit. And I think that's as important on the offensive line, or probably more important than anywhere else on the field.
And to like highlight the offensive line struggles, because it wasn't just like below average, it was really bad. And again, that's why I think it just kind of, masks so many other really good parts of this roster. Michigan's offensive line played 15 games. They gave up 109 quarterback pressures. South Carolina's offensive line only played in 12 games. They gave up 190. And that just kind of highlights just how much this offensive line struggled. And when you were trying to win games in the SEC and your offensive line can't run the football, can't pass pro, it's a problem. I think it gets much better, which I think leads to South Carolina team being much more competitive in the 2024 season. Number 3 on the offensive side of the football. And I think, a fascinating conversation to have, and that is a more balanced pass catcher room. I'll ask you this, but also ask the South Carolina fans who probably do know this. Okay, so you had a true wide receiver one in Xavier Legette. He caught for over 1,200 yards. I'll just have you guess, because I don't think you know this answer. Who is your next leading receiver, and more importantly, how many yards did they go for?
I'm going to guess 250, and I'm guessing Nick Harborough.
It was Trey Knox at 300. And so I think that just kind of highlights it was a one-trick pony in terms of Xavier Legette or bust in the pass catcher room. I look at this South Carolina wide receiver room and this pass catcher room in general, because I think you have some talented tight ends as well, and say, all right, you might not have an Xavier Legette, although Nick Harbor could certainly turn into an Xavier Legette. You're more balanced. You go to the transfer portal, bring in a ton of guys who've been productive either at lower Power 5 or Group of 5 levels. I think this pass catcher room becomes more balanced. And my bold prediction, that's a long way of kind of not getting to my bold prediction here. 3 pass catchers going for 500+ yards. Last year, South Carolina only had 1.
Yeah, and that's going to be a huge part for them. I'm kind of with you. Just their inability to kind of diversify that offense away from Xavier Legette in general, because you can't run the ball. You can't really have any other weapons. It was just such a Legette show. And again, Spencer Rattler having to pull things out of his hat, just how much pressure that kind of put on, again, those two kind of players. It is just, again, really hard to run an effective offense consistently against good teams. So I think that's a huge one. And that's kind of the one I think we're all kind of looking for, is who are going to be those guys to step up. Because you're right, not a ton of proven SEC production, I would say.
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of names that you're excited about. Going to the defensive side of the football, let's start with Dylan Stewart at the edge rusher position, freshman All-American. I think this is a massive storyline. And I remember being at the table for the South Carolina program saying, hey, we got to get better along the line of scrimmage, especially on the inside of the defensive line. They were very, very good on the inside of the defensive line in 2023. You talk about Tonky, you talk about Alex Huntley, you talk about TJ Sanders playing a phenomenal season in 2023. I look at the inside of the defensive line and say this could be one of the better groups that we see in the SEC. Now, I think what really hurt South Carolina last year is they didn't have the presence of that elite edge rusher. Now, you go into 2024 and say Kyle Kennard coming from Georgia Tech, pretty damn solid. Gilbert Edmond coming back. If we can get the Gilbert Edmond we saw in 2022, we feel pretty good about him. And I think the question is, who's going to be your elite pass rusher? I think Desmond Yu, certainly going into his second year, could be that guy. But I saw Dylan Stewart, true freshman early enrollee, in that South Carolina spring game. This kid looks the part. And you talk about South Carolina capitalizing some of that top-end talent, guys like Nick Harbor, guys like Dylan Stewart. If Dylan Stewart can come in and kind of be that big-time pass rusher juice coming off the edge, that might be the biggest storyline outside of the offensive line for the South Carolina program.
I don't think you have like crazy pressure on him necessarily to have to play a ton or do anything like Herculean, but I'm kind of with you. I think you look, Kennard, Gilbert Edmond, like really good physical defensive ends. I think you'll be able to play them kind of all down. But then when you do want to kind of ramp that pass rush up, I think you kind of looked at some of those young guys, whether it's Desmond Yu, whether it's obviously Dylan Stewart, who certainly is going to be probably by far the most talented player on this defensive line, at least in the edge room. I don't want to say anything negative about that interior because you're right. Those guys, all three are hammers. But I think you look, Dylan Stewart is the guy who I think, again, gives you that real top end ability at that.
And you look at it, and I think you're right. You don't have to play him on first and second down if you still have some question marks about the physicality in terms of stopping the run. Hey, just use him as we're going to get into third and long with our really good front seven, specifically on the inside. Do we have a pass rusher that we can say, hey, pin your ears back, get after the quarterback? You didn't have that last year. I think Dylan Stewart, I think Desmond Yu could be some of those guys. Dylan Stewart, freshman All-American, my bold prediction. Going to number 5, this is yours. I'm just going to let you cook. Nick Emenari being a top 50 NFL draft pick. Now the South Carolina fans hoping he stays for his senior year. He's certainly good enough to go to the NFL. I think you're just trying to highlight that Nick Emenari can be one of the better defensive backs in the SEC. Tell us why.
Yeah, and I just think you talk about the completeness. I mean, you see in that Clemson game being able to make plays in the ball, take the football away, be able to come downhill, make plays in the box, be able to play in man coverage and be comfortable, not kind of look like your traditional safety who's grabby and getting penalties. I just think there's nothing on the field that he can't do. I think he's so important to that zone scheme that South Carolina likes to run in their back end, and guys need to be playing in sync and being where they're supposed to be, and then having the athleticism to go make plays on the football. I think he has all that. I think he's the most important member of this defense. I think he's the best player on this defense personally, and I think he's gonna have a huge year. And if you're a South Carolina fan, yeah, you want him to stay, but you also probably want him to play good enough where he is kind of in that first round conversation.
And I think the story around the South Carolina secondaries on paper, maybe it struggled a little bit. I think it had a lot more to do with the lack of pass rush up front than it had that secondary. I think at times that secondary, especially from a talent standpoint, is pretty dang good. You got some young cats.
A lot of it back, so you're going to have the continuity, and that's kind of a complex scheme they run. It's not a ton of man coverage, just like go be an athlete and do what you do. It's a complicated scheme. It's a scheme that, again, I think if they get more comfortable in, they can take the football away a little bit more. And then I think you're right. If that pass rush cranks up, I think that really benefits what they're doing in the back end.
Agreed. We'll cut it there. I feel good about these bold predictions. This is one where I was kind of going through my bold predictions. I feel pretty dang good about a lot of these for South Carolina. And if some of these do kind of come to fruition, this team's going to be dangerous in the 2024 season. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Would love to hear some bold predictions from you guys in the comments section. We'll talk to y'all later.